Hello everybody, my name is Audrey Schuster, and today in this video I'm going to be showing you how to make this delicious creamy chicken Alfredo pasta. We're going to be making everything from scratch in this recipe. That includes the noodles, the chicken, and the sauce. I'm going to be showing you step by step how to make this delicious meal. It's not too difficult, it's quite time consuming, but it's a very rewarding process, especially just making your own pasta rather than resorting to boxed pasta. It tastes so much better. And I'm going to be walking you through also a couple other things that I like to keep in mind when working in the kitchen, just to make sure that you're more comfortable as well. So let's get started. So we're going to start off with making the dough for our noodles, because this whole process takes the longest out of any of this. We're going to make sure that our countertop is nice and clean, because we're going to be making this on the countertop instead of a bowl, because it's much easier. So go ahead and measure out 2 cups of flour. We're just going to pour that onto our countertop. And then we're going to add half a teaspoon of salt to this pile. And once we've done that, we're going to make a big well in the middle of our pile. This is where our wets are going to go, our wet ingredients. We're going to add half a tablespoon of olive oil. This is going to add some flavor to our noodles, just so they're not really bland. And then we're going to add 3 eggs. These eggs are going to add some nice color from the yolk, and it's going to add some nice chewy texture to our noodles, so it's not going to taste gritty. And so the flavor includes a much richer profile, which is much better for our noodles. We're going to whisk our eggs in the middle of this little flour bowl. Make sure they're well mixed. And then we're going to flour our hands very well. It's going to be very sticky at this point. And we're going to move our flour into the egg. It's going to start spilling out, and this whole process is going to make a very big mess. But you just got to work through it. When you start kneading our dough, it's going to be very sticky. In the end, it's not very sticky, but you got to get through that hurdle of this really sticky, dry dough. It's going to stick to your hand. No matter how much flour you put on your hands, it's going to stick. There's just no way around it. So what I like to do, preferably, is to just start kneading it to the point where it's just before it stops being that really sticky mess, which is like about 4 minutes. And I'm going to wash my hands and get rid of all that extra dough off my hands. And I'm going to reflour them. That makes the whole process a lot easier when we get all of that excess dough off of our hands that we just can't get off because it's so sticky. As you're watching this process of me kneading the dough, you'll notice that the dough somewhat goes through 3 different phases. It starts off as this really sticky mass, and then it slowly turns into this dry, crumbly mess. And you might get to this point, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, this isn't dough. This isn't going to make good noodles. But you just got to keep going. And once you get to the 8-minute mark, I prefer to go to 10 minutes. Once you get to that 8-minute mark, which is about right here, it starts forming this really nice soft dough. It's still going to be a bit, it's going to have some resistance when you're moving it, but once we let it sit, it's going to soften up plenty good for rolling out our noodles. Once we're finished with kneading our dough, we're going to take this and we're going to let it sit. But since this dough dries out so easily, we're going to make sure that we wrap it in cellophane before we start rolling our dough out. Now we're going to be rolling out our pasta, and before we start, we're going to put some flour onto the workspace and the rollers of our pasta roller, and we're going to split the dough that we had into quarters just so it's easier to fit through the machine. We're going to start off with the widest setting. And for the first few rolls, you're going to want to fold it into thirds like you see how I'm doing, just so we can get a more rectangular shape out of our pasta sheet that we're rolling. Having it even preserves the life of our roller and prevents having buildup of the oil that is in the machine to come out and start touching where the food would be, which we don't want that. I typically go through each setting just a couple times each before I move to the next smallest setting. You can kind of see why, because when I first pull it out, you see how the sheet of pasta starts shrinking a bit. When we roll it through multiple times, it starts to get used to that shape and doesn't shrink as much. And when you're rolling it through, the longer it gets, you want to make sure you start guiding your pasta through the roller, because sometimes if it gets too close to the edge, like you can see here, that it'll start folding in on itself, and that'll put extra tension on the gears inside the machine, and that's not good for the health of the machine. So once we get it to the thickness that we want, which is for my machine is about a level 7, we're gonna I normally cut it in half just because it's much easier to handle, and we're gonna roll it through our fettuccine cutter. What you could do as well, if you do not have a pasta roller, you can take your sheet, make a big sheet, fold it into thirds, and cut it by hand with a chef's knife. But this way, it's just a lot faster. Once I cut them, I separate them into servings. Sometimes I make them a little bit bigger, sometimes a little bit smaller, and I kind of ball them up and I let them sit on a baking sheet and just let it dry up, just so we can have nice dry pasta before we move on. So I'm going to give a quick tip on peeling garlic cloves. Now, this can be a bit difficult for some people that aren't as comfortable with working with fresh garlic. Like, you'll notice how it's got a very thick skin on the outside. We don't really want that when we're making anything with garlic cloves. And you can try to peel it, but it's very inefficient. So what I like to do is I like to put it at the base of my palm and push down until you hear like a nice cracking sound. And then once you go to look at it again, you're able to peel it off much easier than what you could have done beforehand. Before we move on to making our sauce, I just want to cover how to hold a chef's knife real quick. So you want to take your index finger and make sure that it's laying on the one side of the blade. And then we're going to take our thumb and have it hold the other side of the blade right near the base where it comes into the handle. And that gives us a lot extra control when we're cutting with these very sharp chef's knives. As you can see, I just am cutting up our chicken breast into very small pieces, bite-sized pieces, before we move on to our sauce. We're going to melt down 4 tablespoons of butter in with our minced garlic clove. We're also going to add a 1/4 cup of flour and 2 tablespoons of shredded Parmesan before we add in our milk. I like to add in a little bit extra cheese just for flavor, and then we're going to add in a teaspoon and a 1/4 of Italian seasoning. It's going to look very liquidy at first, but once we cook it down a bit, it's going to thicken up because of the flour that's in there. I'm cooking down some chicken. I only added like a little bit of seasoning just because we have so much seasoning in the sauce already, and I want that to be the main focus. We're going to be cooking our noodles. Our noodles only need to take about 3 minutes since they're fresh. We're going to butter them, and then we're going to add our chicken and our sauce. I really want to thank you all for watching today. It's been a great pleasure getting to show you how to make these fresh noodles, this delicious sauce, and some really good chicken. It's been a time, and I hope you all enjoy making this meal on your own.